Sir, you ever see someone get turned away from their own brother's funeral? That's how it starts. Had no warning. No build-up, just a faded old soldier at the gates of Quantico, clutching a wilted lily and watching the brass go by like he was invisible. This is a restricted area, sir. Military funeral, 4-star general, no clearance, no entry. The kid at the checkpoint didn't even bother to look up. Just another ghost from another war, you know what I mean? But that's how the best stories begin, right at the edge, when someone gets pushed aside. Franklin Hayes stood there, in a uniform that had seen more sunrises than most of those inside would ever count. The green turned gray at the seams, boots polished to a humble shine. No medals, just a single threadbare patch, and that flower wrapped in cloth, like he'd spent all morning deciding whether it was worth the trip. Behind the gates, the world spun in high-gear camera flashes, politicians, secretaries of defense, ranks so thick you could barely see the sky. They were all here for General Marcus R. Connors, the kind of man whose name got whispered in Pentagon halls, the kind of hero who got state funerals and closed-circuit security, the works. Not just anybody could step inside. Lists were checked, names cross-referenced, ID badges gleaming. No one got in without the right paperwork. Not even someone like Franklin. And you know what? He didn't argue. Didn't even try. Just stood at the wall, hands steady, face set in the kind of patience you only get from wading through a lifetime of being told no. If he was bitter, you couldn't see it, just a man come to pay respects, content to let the world rush on by. But someone did notice. Deep in the crowd, Colonel Logan Marks spotted him, the uniform first, then the patch. He leaned over to General Michael Thurman, whispered, "He's here." The general didn't hesitate, not even a second. He stepped out of formation, handed off his saber, and strode through the crowd with the kind of authority that made even the press hold their breath. He crossed the gravel, opened the gate himself, and stood at attention before Franklin Hayes. "Sir, we've been waiting for you." There was a crack in the general's voice, the kind of thing that doesn't show up on official transcripts. He took the ashes of Marcus Connors presented in a polished wooden box and handed them to Franklin, right there in front of the cameras and the silent, blinking soldiers. "General Connors requested you deliver him home," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Franklin's hand shook just a little as he took the box. "I thought they forgot," he said, and the general's reply came out rough. "We didn't." At the far edge of the ceremony, the old ghosts of Ghost Company men who hadn't worn a uniform in decades stood up, one by one, saluting as Franklin walked through the gate. Not protocol, just memory. Let me back up a sec. Before all this, before the headlines and the flags, there was Can Combat Base, 1968. Kisan, the kind of siege that eats men alive. Franklin was on his second tour, already too old for the boys around him, but too stubborn to stand down. Night after night, the world rattled with mortars, the line between smoke and fog erased by fear and noise. On day 34, it all went sideways. 2 platoons over gunfire, screaming on the comms, Connors down, outside the wire. Franklin didn't wait for orders. Hirano backup, no cover, just heart and old instinct. Found them pinned behind a half-collapsed shack, one bleeding out. Another, a fresh-faced lieutenant named Price, shouting orders like he hadn't learned to be scared yet. And there was Connors, face-torn, ankle busted, still dragging his radio pack. Franklin barely paused. Through smoke, grabbed both men, and pulled them through a storm of tracers. He didn't notice he was bleeding till it was all over. Refused the medal, didn't want a commendation. "I just did what I was supposed to do." After the war, he slipped out of history's pages, vanished into the quiet. You ever wonder about the folks who just fade away? Back at Quantico, the letter from Connors burned in Franklin's coat pocket, word from a man who'd spent decades shaping armies and never forgot a muddy field in Vietnam. The official reception began, flags, speeches, program cards. Franklin stood in the shadow of the trees, apart, watching until a nervous young lieutenant approached, asking if he was family, press, or attached. 3rd Recon Battalion. Charlie Company. Hesang 1968. That's all he said. The lieutenant didn't get it, but a captain nearby sure did recognize the look, the history. That set off a ripple through the crowd. 10 minutes later, everything changed. General Andrew Price, the same kid Franklin saved half a century earlier, stepped out of the command tent. Not escorted, not surrounded, just moving with quiet purpose. He walked the whole length of the field, straight toward Franklin, and saluted one old soldier to another. "I told Marcus I'd find you again," he said. He handed Franklin the urn. "But only you can bring him home." And right there, in full view of the brass, the Secretary of Defense, and half the Pentagon, the two men, one famous, one forgotten, walked together, shoulder to shoulder, past stunned officers, past cameras lowered in reverence. General Price took the Miknos speech, no script, just the truth. There are moments in military life that live far beyond the battlefield. If not for this man, Marcus Connors would not have lived past 19. I would not have survived my first command. You could hear the crowd breathing, the silence so thick it felt holy. The honor guard parted. Franklin stepped up, placed the urn above the folded flag, and for one long moment, time froze. No anthem, no applause, just that weighty, respectful hush as Franklin walked the ashes down the aisle. Veterans in civilian clothes stood with trembling salutes. Old men with battered jackets wiped away tears. This wasn't about medals or protocol. This was about debt, the kind you carry, the kind you never speak of unless someone stands up and remembers. Later, when the crowd thinned and only the oaks cast shadows, Franklin knelt by the grave, lit incense, whispered, "I told you I'd make it rest easy, kid." General Price appeared beside him, handed him an envelope, one last note from Connors, written for Franklin alone. It was short. "You saved my life and disappeared like it didn't matter." But it did. If there's any justice, one day they'll say my name beside yours. Franklin tucked the letter away, just nodded. "I didn't do it for thanks." Price's voice broke a little. "That's why you deserve it." A year passed. Spring sunlight, crowd gathering at the opening of the Franklin Hayes Centera Home for Healing, a place for veterans to find peace that medals can't buy. Franklin stood at the edge of it all, coat over his shoulders, that same white lily in hand, just watching young men and women step inside. He didn't want a building named after him. "It's not a building," Price told him. "It's a thank you etched in stone." And as the sun dipped low, Franklin walked away alone, but not unnoticed, not anymore. People watched with respect. Maybe they didn't salute him in public, but in their hearts, they remembered. Sometimes justice isn't about medals or speeches or headlines. Sometimes it's just about standing up for the quiet heroes and saying, "We never forgot." You tell me, did we finally get it right? Or do we still owe men like Franklin more than we can ever repay? Now, I want to hear what you think. Where's the line between recognition and humility? What does real justice look like when the world's watching? Share your thoughts below, because stories like these deserve to be heard, argued, and remembered.